Welcome back to the Midnight Page podcast, where we lower the lights, pour something strong, and talk about books that understand us a little too well. Tonight's book is Beach Red by Emily Henry. And before we dive in, I need you to understand something. This book opens with a confession. January Andrews, our protagonist, tells us she has a fatal flaw, and the way she describes it, it's one of the most honest things I've ever read in a romance novel. I have a fatal flaw. I like to think we all do, or at least that makes it easier for me when I'm writing, building my heroines and heroes up around this one self-sabotaging trait, hinging everything that happens to them on a specific characteristic, the thing they learn to do to protect themselves and can't let go of, even when it stops serving them. And January's fatal flaw, she's a hopeless romantic. She can't stop telling herself the story, the beautiful, golden-lit story of her own life, complete with a melodramatic soundtrack and the belief that everything will work out, because love always wins. Because that's what she writes. That's who she is. Or at least, that's who she was. Until everything unraveled, we meet January at 29 years old. Miserable, broke, semi-homeless, very single. And pulling up to a gorgeous lake house whose very existence nauseates her. See, here's the thing. January's father just died, and at his funeral, a woman approached her, a stranger with white hair and a crocheted shawl who smelled like vanilla and citrus, a woman who said she was an old friend of her father's, a woman who handed January a key and an envelope and said, "He wanted you to have this." The key was to a beach house, a beautiful bohemian lake house in North Bear Shores, Michigan, a house January's mother knew nothing about. Except that's a lie. Her mother did know. She'd known for years, and she'd never told January. So January's perfect parents, the ones who danced in the kitchen, who held hands through cancer treatments, who called her tipsy on wine in each other's company, were not what she thought they were. Her father had a second life, a second house, a second woman. And the story January had been telling herself about her life, it was just that, a story, the beautiful narrative she'd constructed to protect herself from the messiness of reality. But it was just a story. And when one gaping plot hole appeared, the whole thing unraveled. That's how stories work. Now January has to spend the summer in her dead father's love nest, emptying it so she can sell it, while simultaneously writing a romance novel she no longer believes in. Because she's broke, her publisher is waiting, and she hasn't been able to write a single happy ending since she found out the truth about the man who taught her to believe in them. And then there's the neighbor. January's first interaction with him is not great. She's on the phone with her best friend Shadi, joking about foot jobs, and she doesn't realize she can be heard. The man on the deck next door, shadowy, bored, drinking beer, drawls. What's disturbing about foot jobs as a form of currency? He's rude, dismissive, the kind of neighbor who makes "let me know if you need any sugar" sound like "never speak to me again unless my house is on fire." January calls him the grump. She plans to avoid him all summer, and then she walks into a bookstore and sees a display table stacked with one book, an autographed bestseller. And she recognizes the name on the cover, Augustus Everett. Gus, as she knew him in college, Her college rival, the literary fiction darling who once looked at her across a workshop table and said, "Let me guess, everyone lives happily ever after again." The grump is Gus Everett, and he's been living next door this whole time. January does what any reasonable adult would do. She hides behind a bookshelf. The rivalry between January and Gus goes back years. In college, she was the bright-eyed romantic writing hopeful stories about love and connection. He was the brooding gravedigger turned writer, crafting literary fiction about twisted families and the darkness of human nature. They spent 4 years taking turns winning writing prizes and barely speaking to each other. She thought he looked down on her work. He thought she was naive. They were both probably right and also completely wrong. But now they're both stuck in the same place, both struggling to write, both carrying more baggage than they'd ever admit. And after a disastrous book club meeting where January accidentally gets drunk and Gus drives her to a donut shop run by a man in his underwear, they end up having an actual conversation about writing, about being stuck, about the assumptions they've made about each other. Gus admits he has a hard time with happy endings, not because he thinks they're stupid, because he doesn't believe in them. Life is pretty much a series of good and bad moments, right up until the moment you die, which is arguably a bad one. Love doesn't change that. And January, who used to believe in love so fiercely she built her entire career on it, finds herself unable to argue because right now, heartbroken and disillusioned, she's not sure she believes anymore either. So Gus proposes something outrageous. A bet, a swap, a challenge. January will write literary fiction, the bleak, dark, nothing works out kind of book Gus is famous for. Gus will write a romance, a genuine, swoon-worthy, happily ever after love story. Whoever sells their book first wins. And to help each other, they'll spend their weekends teaching each other their process. Fridays, January will follow Gus on his research, interviewing cult survivors, visiting dark places, digging into the ugly parts of humanity. Saturdays, Gus will follow January on herds, carnivals, dance floors, all the romantic comedy cliches he's spent his career avoiding. They shake on it. And neither of them realizes what they're actually agreeing to. Because this isn't really about writing. This is about two broken people slowly teaching each other how to see the world differently. What follows is one of the best slow burns I've read in years. Because January and Gus don't just go on research excursions. They start writing at the same time every day. Sitting at their respective kitchen tables, facing each other through their matching windows. And when they need a break, they hold up handwritten notes. At first, the notes are writing platitudes. Life is meaningless, January. Gaze into the abyss. This reminds me of that Taylor Swift video. But they become more elaborate, more personal, more ridiculous. They write things like fuck writing and should we just ditch this and become coal miners? And if you're a bird, I'm a bird. They laugh until they can't hold their markers. They lay their heads on their tables in defeat. They snort into their coffee. And at night, they sit on their separate decks with drinks, watching the sun slide into the lake, talking about books and movies, and embarrassing concert experiences and terrible jobs. And sometimes they just sit in silence, not quite together, but definitely not alone. This is what I mean when I say The tension is built on familiarity. By the time anything romantic happens, they've already seen each other at their worst. They've already shared things they've never told anyone else. Gus's research takes them to dark places. They interview a man named Dave, whose father died in a cult fire. They visit the site of a failed commune. They talk to people who've survived things that should have broken them. And January watches Gus in these moments, careful, attentive, listening without judgment, and she starts to understand something. He doesn't write about darkness because he's cynical. He writes about it because he's trying to make sense of his own. Because Gus's childhood was not like January's. His father was abusive. His mother died when he was young. He dropped out of high school to take care of a man who resented him. He has a tattoo of a Mobius strip on his arm, a symbol of infinite loops, of being trapped in patterns you can't escape. When he finally tells January about his past, she says something that hits him harder than she realizes. You don't know the difference between pity and sympathy. I'm not pitying you. It makes me sad to think of you being treated like that. It makes me mad to think you didn't have the things all kids deserve. That's not pity. That's caring about someone. January's research takes them to carnivals and frat parties and dance floors. She makes Gus ride Ferris wheels and eat corn dogs and watch rom-coms. And she watches him try, genuinely try, to understand what makes people believe in love. He's not mocking her anymore. He's curious. He's paying attention. There's a moment at a carnival where they're dancing, badly, awkwardly, surrounded by people, and Gus is so clearly uncomfortable. But he's doing it anyway, because she asked him to. And January realizes she's watching a man who spent his whole life protecting himself from hope, slowly letting himself feel something he can't control. The tension builds in the way only the best slow burns can. There are moments, so many moments, hands brushing under a table at Olive Garden, and they sit there holding hands, pretending they aren't, pretending they're not acting 16 years old and a little bit obsessed with each other. A hug on the beach that lasts too long, his hands turning slow circles against her spine until she sinks into him completely. And then there's the night at the drive-in movie. They're sitting in his car, watching some film neither of them is paying attention to, and the space between them keeps shrinking. His hand finds her thigh. Her fingers curl into his hair, and suddenly they're kissing, really kissing, and his hands are everywhere, sliding beneath her clothes, and she's climbing over the center console toward him. They're tangled together in the driver's seat, her straddling his lap, his mouth trailing down her throat. When headlights sweep over the car from a nearby vehicle, they freeze, pull apart, sit there breathing hard, while the moment dissolves around them. That almost, that interruption, makes everything that comes later feel even more inevitable. Gus has a rule: one time, one night. He doesn't do relationships. He doesn't do feelings. He's been burned too badly to risk it again. But January isn't asking him for forever. She's just asking him to be here, now, with her. And when they finally cross that line, in a basement of all places, surrounded by potato salad and holiday decorations, it's not polished or perfect. It starts with January crying. She's just found something that reminds her of her father, and Gus holds her while she sobs, his mouth pressing soft kisses into her cheek, her chin catching her tears, and then his lips pause against her forehead, slightly parted, and the air shifts. She turns her face into his chest, breathes him in incense and the occasional stress cigarette, and something that's just him, and then she's in his lap, straddling his hips, and his hands are grazing along her waist, sliding up her spine, and every touch is rough and warm like him. His fingers find the hem of her shirt, her tongue brushes his finger, and he pulls her closer until their lips are separated by an inch of electric buzzing air, and then his mouth finally meets hers, fierce and hot and slow. And January feels like she might melt against him before the kiss has even ended. They're interrupted by a doorbell, takeout delivery, and the way they stare at each other in that frozen moment, breathing hard, wanting more, tells you everything about how long this has been building. But it doesn't end there. Later, in the basement again, everything ignites. Her back against a tool rack, his hands sliding beneath her shirt, turning slow circles against her skin. When she arches under his touch, his grip tightens, making her gasp. He pulls back, breathing hard. "Did I hurt you?" She shakes her head. And that's what makes Gus work as a romantic lead. He's intense, yes. Hungry, absolutely. But he checks in. He pays attention. When he lifts her shirt over her head, he doesn't rush. He studies her, his voice deep and raspy. "God." And when January teases him about praying to her, his dark gaze drags up her body and he murmurs something like that. "You're so beautiful, January. You're so fucking beautiful. You're like the sun." His mouth moves down her body, tasting all the places he's touched. Her fingernails dig into his back. They stop being gentle with each other. She doesn't want careful, and he gives her exactly what she needs. When she gasps his name, he groans it back. "I want you, January." And then there's the scramble for a condom, which he doesn't have. Because who brings protection to discuss potato salad? And they're running across the yard to his house, barefoot, barely dressed, laughing. They don't make it 3 feet inside before clothes are coming off again. She ends up on his console table, then against a bookcase, then finally, properly, where they both want to be. What makes it work is that it's fun. It's messy and urgent and interrupted and imperfect. And that's exactly right for these two. They've spent weeks circling each other with banter and tension and notes through windows. And when they finally let go, it's with the desperation of two people who've been wanting this longer than they'd ever admit. And afterward, when he kisses her stomach so tenderly, so sweetly, that's when January realizes this wasn't just physical release. This meant something to both of them. It's time for the Midnight Page SpiceMeter. I'm rating this one a 4 out of 5. Here's the breakdown. Open door, clearly adult, no fade to black, multiple scenes that build on each other, from that first desperate encounter in the basement, to the frantic race across the yard, to the slower, more intentional moments that come later. The intimacy is urgent but attentive. Gus is the kind of partner who notices everything, the way she responds, when to tighten his grip, when to slow down. He asks if he's hurt her. He watches her face while he touches her. He tells her she's beautiful, like he's stating a fact he can't quite believe. And January isn't passive. She pulls him closer. She digs her nails into his back. She tells him what she wants. The heat between them is mutual. Two people who've been restraining themselves for weeks, finally letting the tension snap. What elevates it beyond just hot is the emotional context. When his mouth trails down her body, it's not just desire, it's reverence. When she wraps herself around him, it's not just physical need, it's trust. These are two people who've shown each other their damage, and now they're showing each other this. This is two writers who've been circling each other for weeks, finally letting the tension snap spice. It's earned, it's desperate, it's sometimes funny, because real intimacy often is, and it reinforces everything we know about these characters. January, letting go of her need to plan everything. Gus letting himself want something without protecting himself from it. The spice works because it's not separate from the emotional arc. It is the emotional arc. Now, let's go back to the story. But of course, there's a complication, because this is a romance novel, and romance novels understand that happiness has to be fought for. At a launch party for Gus's book, a woman appears, beautiful, familiar, looking at him like she knows exactly who he is. Her name is Naomi, and she's Gus's wife. Not ex-wife, wife. They're still legally married. She left him 2 years ago for someone else, and now she's back, wanting to try again. January finds this out after they've already slept together, after she's already fallen for him, after she's let herself believe that maybe, despite everything, love stories can be real. And in that moment, her father's betrayal comes flooding back, because Gus kept this from her, just like her father kept things from her mother, just like everyone she's ever loved has hidden the parts of themselves that would hurt her. But this is where the book does something beautiful. Remember that envelope January's been avoiding all summer? The letter from her father that she couldn't bring herself to open. It's not one letter, it's dozens. Birthday letters he wrote her every year, never sent, full of confessions and apologies. And love so complicated it breaks her heart all over again. He wrote about his mistakes, his shame, the way he loved her mother and hurt her at the same time, the way he never stopped being her father, even when he was also being something worse. If you think the story has a sad ending, it's because it's not over yet. And January realizes something. Her father wasn't a hero. He wasn't a villain. He was a person, flawed, complicated, capable of great love and great failure at the same time, just like everyone, just like Gus. Gus shows up at her door in a thunderstorm. He's been calling her. She hasn't answered. He came anyway. Music starts blasting from his house. Sinead O'Connor, nothing compares to you. And he tells her he didn't plan this well at all. He thought maybe they'd dance. And then he says, the thing that breaks her open. I've never met someone who is so perfectly my favorite person. When I think about being with you every day, no part of me feels claustrophobic. And when I think about having to have the kinds of fights with you that Naomi and I used to have, there's nothing scary about it, because I trust you more than I've ever trusted anyone. He tells her he doesn't want to brace himself for the worst and miss out on being with her. He wants to prove he can love her forever. And January, who has spent the whole book terrified of believing in happy endings, asks the question that's been haunting her. What if we don't get a happy ending, Gus? And he says, then maybe we should enjoy our happy for now. That line, that line, because that's the thesis of this entire book. You can't know how the story ends. You can't guarantee forever, but you can choose to be present right now with someone who makes the uncertainty worth it. Happy for now isn't settling, it's brave. It's saying, I know this might hurt someday, and I'm choosing it anyway. They stand in the rain, learning to dance together. And for the first time, January lets herself believe. Not in happily ever after, but in something more honest, more real, more worth fighting for. Beach Rid is not a light book disguised as a light book. It's a book about grief disguised as a romantic comedy. It's about losing your belief in the stories that sustained you and learning to build new ones. It gives us a protagonist who is messy and grieving and still fundamentally lovable. An MMC who is guarded and wounded and learns to let himself be seen. A romance built on banter and notes through windows and shared terrible experiences. The spice is excellent, earned, emotional, hot without being gratuitous. The Midnight Page SpiceMeter lands at a solid 4 out of 5. But what makes this book special is its honesty about love. It doesn't promise that everything works out. It promises that loving someone, really loving them, is worth the risk of getting hurt. I know no matter how long I get to love you, it will be worth whatever comes after. If you've ever lost faith in something you used to believe in, this book is for you. If you've ever been the cynical one in a relationship with someone hopeful, this book is for you. If you've ever needed to hear that it's okay to want something even when you're scared of losing it, this book is absolutely for you. And that's Beach Read, a romance novelist who can't write happy endings, a literary fiction author who doesn't believe in them, and a summer that teaches them both that love isn't about certainty. It's about choosing someone anyway. That's all for tonight's episode of the Midnight Page podcast. Slow burns, complicated grief, notes held up through kitchen windows, and stories that remind us that even when we're broken, we're still capable of being someone's favorite person. May your stories hold you gently, and may your happy for now be enough